We'll do a review on the Sichas and Chelek Chav Dalet, volume 24, the first Sicha for the Parsha of Re'eh. In this Sicha, the Rebbe makes a distinction between the Beis Hamikdash that was in Shiloh for 369 years and the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim. They both had a level of permanence, and the Rebbe makes the distinction that in Shiloh, Hashem chose it because he needed to give a place for the people where they should be able to bring the korbanos. In the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim, that was chosen, that place was chosen from Hashem to be the place of his divine presence. And therefore, he says that we need to bring the korbanos there. It makes a difference with regards to the structure that was in Shiloh. Over there, that structure inherently was not chosen. You needed a place. The place was Shiloh. And therefore, you brought it into the structure that was in Shiloh. But since Yerushalayim, that place was chosen by Hashem to be the place, that place is also a requirement. The korbanos need to be brought there. The Rebbe has a lot of interesting explanations in the Pesukim, in the Rambam, in the Sifri, to support this contention. But basically, the Sikha talks about that once, it brings down from the Mishnah, and of course our Parsha discusses about this as well, that once the Beis Hamikdash was built, you can no longer bring a korban on a bama. A bama means a place that you raise up and make a mizbeach, no different than we find by Avram, Yitzchak, and the Chumash. The different korbanos. Adam brought a korban. They brought them on bamas. Those are raised area. Once the Beis Hamikdash, whether it's Shiloh, the one in Shiloh, or the one in Yerushalayim were built, then you can no longer. Then at that point, you were not allowed to bring into a bama. Also, when the Mishkan was there. So we are going to discuss and see how things changed when they came to the Mishkan Shiloh, and how things changed when we came to the Mishkan, to the Beis Hamikdash Eilami. Over there, once we have the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim, then no more bamis anywhere. Basically, just to keep track, the Jewish journey, they started with the Mishkan. The Mishkan was with them during the journeys in the desert for the 40 years that they were in the desert, the 39 years that they were in the desert. And then they brought the Mishkan across. When they crossed the Yarden, they brought it to the Gilgal. Over there, they set up the Mishkan. And during that period, while they had the Mishkan, and they had the camps. So at that point, you can only bring korbanos in the Mishkan. Nobody was allowed to bring korbanos elsewhere. Of course, before the Mishkan was built, as mentioned, anybody could bring a korban wherever they wanted, bring on their bama. But once the Mishkan was built, you couldn't do it until they came to Gilgal. Over there, they took apart the Mishkan, and we'll go through the inside in the Mishnah and in the Rambam, and there was no longer the machnes over there, as we'll see inside. Okay, I don't want to get carried away too much in the details. Let's leave it for the Sikha. Let's look inside. Rei Aleph. Wegen der Chiyuv, as me soll bringen, makriv sein Korbanos bloß in Beis Hamikdash Davke. with regards to the obligation that you must bring and offer the sacrifices only in the Beis Hamikdash. That's where you have to bring. Und dem Isur HaKrov Mechutz LaMikdash. And then there is a prohibition of offering korbanos outside of the Mikdash. That's discussed, as the Rebbe will later on bring down in our parsha. It talks about the mitzvah to bring it to the Beis Hamikdash and the prohibition of bringing a korban outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Werden ausgerechnet in Mishnah, so the Mishnah enumerates, weil derech ze in Sifri, and similarly in the Sifri, the shlovim shabozeh, the steps that took place in this Mishkan requirement and the prohibition of the Bama. Mishahukam ha-Mishkan nesru ha-Bomis. Before the Mishkan, people could bring a korban, but once the Mishkan was raised, the Bomis were prohibited. Bomis is the short for bringing a korban outside of the Beis Hamikdash on a raised place. So once the Mishkan was raised, no more Bomis. Bomis were prohibited. Then they crossed the Jordan, Bo Gilgal. They came to the Gilgal. Over there, Hutru Habomis. Once they were in Gilgal, they no longer had the full Mishkan with the Machanes over there. So at that point, the Bomis were permitted. Everybody could bring a korban in their backyard. You don't have to bring it to the Mishkan that they set up in the Gilgal. You don't have to bring it there. You can bring it anywhere. Then, Bo Shiloi. The next step, they came to the Shiloi. Over there, once again, that was a extended period of time, as we'll see in a minute, 369 years. Nesru ha-Bomis, once again, the Bomis have been prohibited. And then the Rambam, and the Mishnah says, V'loi hoya shom tikra elo bayis abonim. There was no roof over there in Shiloh. They still used the covers of the Mishkan over the Mishkan Shiloh. However, elo bayis abonim, but there was a structure made out of stone. And even though it wasn't a full bayis like it was in the Beis Hamikdash, a tikra, there was a roof over there, but still, vihi hoyso melucha, as we'll see in the pasuk, that was considered a resting place. And that's why that was a resting stop, and that's why no Bomis once that was established, the Shiloi, the Mikdash in Shiloi. Then after Shiloi was destroyed, Bo Lenoi V'Givan. Those are two stops. Those were short, just much less years, a few years. Hutra Bomis, and then once again the Bomis were permitted. And Bo L'Yerushalayim, and then finally the next stop is they came to Yerushalayim again. Nesru ha-Bomis. Now the Bomis have been prohibited. V'loi hoya lohen oid heter, and no more. There was never again a permission to bring a korban on a bama. Bamas were asur. V'hi hoysa nachlo. That was the inheritance. You have menucha and nachla. We'll see from the pasuk. Menucha, that's the Shiloi, and nachala, the final resting place, that's Yerushalayim. And once they came to the nachala, from there, there's no more bomis at all. So the Rebbe says, this is move on Miloshen HaMishnah. as is understood from the language of the Mishnah, that there is an association between that the Bamis were Asur, specifically by Shiloi, not by Gilgal, and not by Novi Givon, but specifically by Shiloi, that it's associated with the fact that it was a stone structure. Is that Inyan from Bo the Shiloi Nem Nesur Habomis? The idea that once they came to Shiloi and the Bomis were prohibited, verbunden damit was dort is given Abayis Abonim. Over there was a structure made out of stone. It was permanent. It had permanence to it. As we said, that was a resting. And that's why no more bombers. As opposed to Mashenkin Begilgul Lifneze, in the stop previously where they raised the Mishkan, was demultot men aufgestellt dem oil moyed, and then they raised the oil moyed. And over there was no longer the laws of prohibiting a bombers. You could do bombers. Over here, because there was a bias, that's why we could not make any more bombers. With the Loshna Rambam, Nikro Shiloi Bayis. In the Rambam language is Nikro Shiloi Bayis. All of the Rebbe is trying to prove over here that the structure in Shiloi had a bias status to it. That's why the din is that you can't bring korbanos anywhere else. You have to bring it only in Shiloi. It's because of the status of that it has a bias. The problem the Rebbe asks is, but the pasuk says clearly that until the Eibishter came to Yerushalayim, he never had a bias. But here he does have a bias. Darf man verstehen, we need to understand, a statement in pasuk. It says very clearly in the verse, Ki lo yashavti babayis limiyoim ha'loisi as bnei Yisrael mi Mitzrayim va'ad hayoim hazeh. Eibishter says when he was building the Beis Hamikdash, Shlomo HaMelech, it says, by David HaMelech, it says in the pasuk in Shmuel Beis, Perik Zayin pasuk Vov, Kilo Yoshavti bebayis. I have not been sitting in a house. L'meyoim ha'aloisi as bnei Yisrael mi Mitzrayim. From the day I brought up the bnei Yisrael from Mitzrayim, va'ad hayom hazeh till this day, till present, ve'ayim is halach ba'olam b'mishkan. I was traveling in a tent and in a mishkan. The first time I have a bayis will be now that we're going to build it. Das heißt, as euch der Mishkan Shiloi wird nicht gerechnet wie a bayis, that also the Mishkan Shiloi is not considered a house, nor blois an oihel or their Mishkan. It's just a tent or a Mishkan, temporary dwelling, but it's not a bayis. So how come we call it a bayis? The Rebbe says not a bayis, and here we're saying that it is a bayis. So the Rebbe says, well, in bayis, relative to the Beis Hamikdash, it's not a bayis. Relative to the Mishkan, it is a bayis. So in the pasuk, it's talking about relative to the Beis Hamikdash, and that's why he says I wasn't in home, because it didn't have the tikra on it. I'm adding that point. Doesn't say the sikha didn't have a full, but the Rebbe says it has to have a connection that the bayis, because the halacha is connected to the bayis. The pashtus kemen zogen. Simply, we can say as is vensach legabe vos meret, that it depends with regards what we're talking about. Lagabe the oil moye the Mishkan relative to the oil moye the Mishkan werd Shiloh gerechnet als bayis. Shiloh is considered to be a home. Mashe Einkein Lagabe the Beis Hamikdash Yerushalayim relative to the Beis Hamikdash Yerushalayim is this blois on oil. It's only considered an oil relative to that. But aber von dem was wir verbindet das mit adin mesuyam. But the fact that we are tying the idea that the Shiloh is considered to be a house with a very specific halacha. Isur habamis, we say you're not allowed to make bamis, as the Rebbe put, that's associated from the Mishnah, it's mashma with the fact that this is a bayis. Is mashma, it appeared as oich in Mishkan Shiloh is faran, I gather from bayis. That also Mishkan Shiloh, there is a definition, it's also called bayis, not just because relative to the oil moyed is called a bayis, but also it has a status of a bayis. Was der fari hoysum menucha? That's why it's considered a menucha. As the Rebbe will explain later on, the special level of the bayis of the Shiloh, although it's not at the same level as the bayis in the Beis Hamikdash. In Ois Beis, the Rebbe will explain the difference between the Mishkan and the bayis in Shiloh. That the Mishkan, while the Eibishter chose it, but it didn't have a place, a station, because the Mishkan was traveling, and the station really began in Shiloh. Base Yeshleimer Habir Bazeh, explaining the Rebbe wants to explain the explanation, the status of the Mishkan Shiloh. Megifint in Torah themselben Loshen. In the Torah we find the same language by Shiloh and the Beis Hamikdash Yerushalayim. Both by Shiloh and the Beis Hamikdash Yerushalayim, the Torah refers to them by using the same language. Where do we see this? Oif hamokoim afsher yivchar Hashem, when the pasuk says the place that Hashem chooses, state in Sifri, which is our parsha, Perik Yudalet, pasuk Chav Hey. So it says in the Sifri, Zushilo Yubeis Eilom, that what does it mean? The place that Hashem chooses, Shiloh and Beis Eilomim, they're both included in the same pasuk, Asher Yivchar Hashem, Shiloh and the eternal house of the Beis Hamikdash. Was das gefindt man nicht benegeya the Mishkan frier? We don't find this with regards to the Mishkan earlier, that it should be referred to Hamokai Mashe Yivchar, the place that Hashem chose. And obviously, that wasn't chosen place because there was no place over there. As Rebbe will explain. Also not with regards to the Mikdash and Noivi Givon, we also don't find over there the language that it's a place that was chosen by Hashem. And very simply, the difference between Shiloh and Yerushalayim are called a chosen place versus the Oyel Moyed and also Noivi Givon, which are not, or Gilgal, which are not called a chosen place. She's moving the pashas the Chelek shebineim. When the Mishkan is gestanden b'midbar, because when the Mishkan was in the desert, Koch oich demot is nesru habomis, although that then too the bomis were prohibited, it still wasn't a chosen place. You needed to bring the offerings only in the Mishkan. Is das aber nit gewend der Mokoy Mashe Yivchar Hashem? It wasn't the place that Hashem chose. Warum is doch nicht gestanden auf ein Ort? It was not standing. The Mishkan was not in one place. It couldn't be the place that Hashem chose. It was traveling. It was going from one travel to the next. Upishita, and it's obvious that we can't say a place that Hashem has chosen as mikendos nit zogen b'negeidu dalet shonim shekovshu v'cholku. That you can't say this during the time of the 14 years in which they were conquering and splitting and distributing the land, which was while they were in the Gilgal. Out there, you can't say that was just the temporary while they were splitting it. That's not a place that Hashem has chosen. Why? When the Mishkan is given in Gilgal, that's when they were the conquering vessels. They'd given the Metzias for Machanes, and there was no camps over there. The whole idea of the separation, the Machanes Shechina, the way it was by the Mishkan, the Oyel Moyed, and later on, but by the 14 years that they were in Gilgal, didn't apply at all. The Rebbe over here does not address directly again the Neuven given. But in any event, versus Shiloi, versus the time that they were traveling with the Oyel Moyed, which was from place to place, and the time they were in the Gilgal, in which they didn't have the machanes, they didn't have the boundaries as they had. That's not the place that Hashem chose. Masha'enkin b'Shiloi, as opposed when they come to Shiloh, was dort ischal the agdore fun hamokoim masha'yivchar Hashem. Over there applies the definition of the place that Hashem has chosen. It was a set place, that place was set for 369 years. Ubemele is Bisman Shiloi given that Isur zu Makriv sein. That's why in the time of Shiloi, it was a place that Hashem has chosen. They were there for 369 years. That's why there was a prohibition to makriv zayin in an under ort, in another place, mechutz leMishkan Shiloi, outside of the Mishkan and Shiloi. Under river. And therefore, that's why they built there a structure out of stone, and it's called a house. That expresses that they are set in the place, as opposed to the Mishkan, the oil, they were walking in the tent, they take it apart and put it together. They built it because that was permanent, that was Bechira. That is the part that Mishkan Shiloi is a bayis, it was a home. And now the Rebbe will explain in Ois Gimel that the way we learn out the permission to offer on a bama as soon as they came into Eretz Yisrael versus the permission to do on a bama after Shiloh was destroyed. After they went into Eretz Yisrael, there was no more Mishkan. Automatically, there was no place, so it became, there was never a place, a permanent place. And once there is no more the Mishkan over there, there was no place, then there was automatically you can do the Bama. But after Shiloh, when there was already a permanence, so one may think that that should stay even after it's destroyed, just like by Yerushalayim. And that's why we need a pasuk for that. Let's look inside Gimel. the mchiluk in the limudim benegeya to heter habomis. We can explain based on this the difference how we learn out that you could bring an aboma that once they entered Eretz Yisrael, they came to Gilgal. At that point, it was bombas were permissible. That's one thing we learn out. And then the other level we learn out that after Shiloh was destroyed, heter abomes did. So you're allowed to bring an abomes after Shiloh. When they came to Nevigiven, that you are allowed to bring you're allowed to bring an aboma. What's the difference? How do we learn out different? To use the language of the Rambam, from the day that the camps, the different Machne Shechina, Machne Levi, Machne Yisrael, have ceased, and they went into the land. They're in Eretz Yisrael. That's the time they came to Gilgal. That's when it stopped. So this mitzvah prohibition of not bringing a korban outside of the mishka, the Moed, has ceased. V'nishar mutar, and then it goes back. It's permissible. Anybody wants to offer an abama can offer, just as it was before the mishka, because it left once is no more machnes, once there is no more that structure, then it becomes permissible. The heter hakrobi zerchmel, that means the right that you're allowed to offer an abama is automatic because the restrictions went down, because there is no more the requirement, there's no more the machnes to hold it back. The balzin itoke machnes, once there's no cap, so it's like before. Before the Mishkan was raised, it basically went back to its original state, because the whole restriction came because of the machanes and the journeys. But now that there's no more machanes, so it goes back to its original state. That's the heter bombas that takes place once they came into Eretz Yisrael, came to the Gilgal, and there were no more machanes. Mash'enkin the heter hakrove bebama. Noch dem Zman for Mishkan Shilui. After the time of Mishkan Shilui, that they allowed again the bombas. We need a special lesson, learning for this. We let it us up from the Pasuk. The Pasuk says, says, Ki lebosam ad oto el hamenucha ve'el hanachalo. Pasuk says, you have not come up till here to the menucha. Menucha is Shiloi, ve'el hanachalo. We teach us, al menucha zu Shiloi, nachla zu Yerushalayim. The Torah says there's two stops. There's one stop, you hadn't come yet to menucha up to this point, which is Shiloi. And then it says you hadn't come yet to the nachla Yerushalayim, and that's why you can bring on the bama, but you haven't got. Why does the Torah has to split it? Torah could have just said you didn't come yet to Shiloh. Once you came to Shiloh, you can't do bamas anymore. But no, that's precisely Lama Chilkan HaKosuf. Why did the pasuk split it and didn't just say that you came to Shiloh Yitzosur? That is to give an allowance that between the Menucha, Shiloh, and Nachalo, Yerushalayim, you could once again do the Bama. So here, we need a special permission. It doesn't go back to the way it was before Shiloh. Over here, we need a special permission to say that now you can do the Bamas when they were in Neuve given. Wie es ist mashma von dem Loschen liten heter as it appears from the language to give you a permission between this and that, is the kasal gadaitoch tzasun bamas. So why would it be the thought to prohibit the bamas? Was the limud shoel that limud? This study is rejecting the thought that you may think that you're not allowed to, and we have a special limud tell you heter bezelazeh is nit val der mishkan is given b'neuvi givon. It's not because there was a mishkan neuvi givon. There was camps over there. That's why there would be a thought. So one can argue, maybe in the Neuve Givon, since there is Mishkan and there is Machnes, so that's not the reason. That is mashma from the Losher. But you would have thought, as Mishabol Shiloi is Batal Gavon Klolosi and Abamis. One would have thought that once you came to Shiloh, the general idea of Bamis, just like later on, after Yerushalayim was chosen, we would think that maybe there's no more Bamis. On the Roif is the Pasuk Machadish and Git, a Heta Bezelazeh. And that's what the Pasuk is, the Heta between one and the other. In other words, the reason the Rav explains why we would think that you should not make a bama while there were a Neuve Givon is not because Neuve Givon also had all the qualifications of the Mishkan and the Machanes. And the Torah says it's still okay. But it's because you would think that the level of once Mishkan Shiloh came into the Mishkan, it became the permanent, and there's no more such a thing as bamis anymore. And it tells you, no, the pasuk says there is, you can still bring in between. It's also understood as such in Rashi's commentary in the Gemara. How do we know that there was a permission for Bamis after the sanctity of Shiloh once it was destroyed? Who says you're allowed to? So we see the issue is that the thought was, without the pasuk, that the kedusha of Shiloh once it was built, it negated the whole idea of Bamis. But why should we say that? It totally took away, negated all the whole idea of Bamis, and that's why we need a pasuk to tell us. Why would we even think so? Nor der fun is muchach. So from this we see, why do we think so? As in Shiloh hat sich aufgetan an inyan von kviyas smoker. Shiloh established the idea that now we have a set place. Was is früher nicht gewesen? That wasn't before, because the camps, they were journeying the whole time, or they didn't have the camps. It became Hamoker B'Shiyivcha Hashem, the place that Hashem chose. Odos mevatel given them in Bamis. So that took place, that negated the whole idea of Bamis. This is a chosen place, and once it's chosen, but then we have a special lesson. The Torah separate Menucha Velanachlo. Shiloh to give a heter, a permission between this and that to do the Bamis. So basically, the Rebbe's Chiddush is here that Shiloh was Bechira, as we see in the Pasuk. The Sifrit Rebbe quoted before that both are considered Bechira. And we see in the Gemara that seems like once it was chosen, it has permanence, and it has permanence, you shouldn't be allowed to bring anytime, even after the destruction. So, but Rebbe asking in Dalet, is Dalet, so if Shiloh was also chosen, and that gave it the permanence, called Asher Yivchar Hashem, The pasuk is both Shiloh and Yerushalayim and the Beis Hamikdash. Why is only the Beis Hamikdash called the Beis HaBechira when Shiloh was also chosen? The Rebbe is going to go into now the whole big chiddush that the Bayis is only Yerushalayim Bechira. The Mokoim is Shiloh chosen as well as permanent place, but the Bayis as a Bechira, the Rebbe will explain, is specifically to Yerushalayim. Dalet. Based on this, we need to understand, since we've determined that also that Shiloh has the permanence because it was chosen by Hashem, and therefore the Bama should have been prohibited, but without the less special limit. Since that also with regards to Shiloh, the language is the place that Hashem chooses. As the Rebbe quoted before, that Yivchar Hashem goes on both, on the Sifri, Zushiloh Yubeiso Ilomim, that Amokim Yivchar Hashem that says in our parsha goes on both, on Shiloh and Beis Lom, it's also called Be'er Hashem. Farvos verdavket der Beis Hamikdash Yerushalayim angerufen. So how come only the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim is referred to as Beis HaBechira, the chosen home? Only the Mishkan Shebeshiloi, not the Mishkan of Shiloh. Why is that not a Beis HaBechira or a Mishkan HaBechira? Why not there? Why is that not chosen? Muslims sagen, so we have to say, although that Shiloh is also referred to as a place that Hashem chose, there is a difference between the way the choice is on Shiloh and Yerushalayim. So the Rebbe says we'll understand this by first introducing the different languages used in the Torah beParsha Sein in our Parsha, about the obligation to bring it in the bayis, the way it is talks about the way the obligation to bring it in the bayis in Shiloh, and the way the obligation is to bring it in the bayis in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Beis Hamikdash. Freer state in Posik. First, the Posik says, Loi sasen kein laHashem Elokeichem. Don't do so to God your God. What does it mean? What shouldn't we do? Can't just bring a korban anywhere. This means, as Rashi explained, you can't offer to Hashem, make a burnt offering to Hashem in every place. Loi sasen kein, you can't do so. But what Asher Yivchar Hashem Goimer Elokeim, Asher Yivchar Hashem Elokecho Goimer L'Shichnoi Sidrishu V'Soshama. Only to the place that God your God chooses to rest, to have his resting place. Over there you should seek L'Shichnoi Tidrishu V'Soshama. You come there V'Vesim Shama L'Seichem Goimer, and you'll bring there your idols. This first part that we're talking now, as whatever we'll see in a minute, is talking about Shiloh. Der noch state, then the Pasuk continues, is you'll go over, pass over the Jordan. Hashem will let you from all the enemies. This is already talking about the Beis Hamikdash. It will be the place that God, your God, will choose it. L'shakein shmoi shom, to rest His name there. Shomo toviu as kol asher anoichi metzava gomer. Over there, you shall bring that which I command you. And we're going to examine the two languages. The first one, which talks about Shiloh, and the second one that talks about the Beis Hamikdash, as the Rebbe brings from the Sifri. Umen is mevayir in Sifri, and is explains in the Sifri. Or Rashi brings us b'pirusha ala Torah, and Rashi brings it down in his commentary on the Torah. As the erster pasuk is Amur Inyan Shiloi. The first pasuk is talking about with regards to Shiloi. And der zweite Amur Inyan Yerushalayim is talking about with regard to Yerushalayim. So the Rebbe is going to say that we see that there is a difference between the psukim. The first pasuk talks mainly about the people. The people don't have a right to bring it elsewhere. Hashem has to give them a place where they can bring it. The second pasuk that talks about Yerushalayim is talking about the Eibush that makes a place, and because there's a place, that's where the people have to bring it to. Zet menocha chiluk in the psukim. You see an additional difference in these verses. In the first pasuk is the hascholas. In the first pasuk, the beginning, and that means the emphasis, hadgosha, if I mentioned, is mainly on the person. Then gavra, we're talking about the person. By vesim shama lesechem, you shall bring there your lesechem. Masha'enkin in zweiten pasuk, as opposed to the second verse, is the haschola, the beginning, hadgosha, that means the emphasis of the mokim. It starts off with the place. Shomo taviu es kol asher anoich betzaveschem. There you shall bring everything I command you. We start with the place, and then that's you bring. The first one starts with the people bringing it to the place. Over here, he said, this is the place, and this is where you should bring. We can say this is connected to a general difference between the psukim. The first pasuk is just talking about not bringing it elsewhere. The Eibush that gives you a place to bring it. The second is talking about Hashem chooses a whole new place, and that's why there you got to bring it. In the erste psukim, Heipton the Torah mit Nisa. The first psukim, the Torah begins with the prohibition. Loi tasun kein lashem alekechem. Don't do so to God your God, which means la'akti l'shamayim b'chol mokim, to offer to Hashem in every place. Und v'ahemshech on natitzof them iser, and as a follow-up, as a result from this prohibition, then comes the obligation that only to the place you should bring it. Thus, what this means is, as in the inyan that when the Eibush that chose this specific place is mudgesh, it's emphasized as der mit vert bavoren der isur, that way we are taking care of the prohibition. This is a prohibition for makris and korbanos b'chol mokai. How are we taking care of this isur that you can't bring korbanos to all places? Nor blois in einort. That's only in one place. So this is the place that is distinguished, so that you don't do it everywhere. You do it in one place. This is going to be chosen because Hashem's blessed choosing. Chooses a place so you don't do it everywhere. So the emphasis, the people have to bring a korban, but we don't want it to do everywhere. So Hashem will give you a place to do it. As opposed to the second verse, is that over there we start with the obligation. We're not talking about any prohibitions. We're talking about there will be a place that God chooses to rest his name there. Over there you should bring it. What this means, Adrabah, on the contrary, as the Shama to view that the reason we bring it over there is that it's a result from the fact because it's a place that Hashem chose. That's why you bring it there. It's not like we're giving you a place so you have where to bring it, but because Hashem chooses it, that's why we require you to bring it. Which makes a big difference. The Rebbe explains now that in Shiloi, the place is only as a result because we got to give the people a place. But in Beis Hamikdash, we choose the place, and that's what the people have to bring there, and which will also be a difference with regards to the structure that is in Mishkan Shiloi and the structure of the Beis Hamikdash. As the Rebbe continues, hey, the phone is move on from this is understood. As let it be, it's taka true that also by Shiloh there was the idea of the choosing. The Eibusher chose it. Aber in the Teuchen Abechira, but the content, the idea of the choosing is Achiluk Ikri Tzvishon Shiloh and Yerushalayim. There is a major difference between Shiloh and Yerushalayim. By Shiloh is given the Bechira and the Mokim. By Shiloh, the choosing of the place, nor Blois Vatetzor, that was only as a result for the Isur Lahakti L'Shamayim B'chol Mokim. There's a prohibition. You can't offer to Hashem every place, so we give you a place. We choose your place so you don't bring it everywhere. It was the far, that's why there needed to be a special place to bring the offering. Thus haste, but really what it means, there is choosing a place because there's a reason, there's a cause for it. Not we choose the place because that's the place we want to choose. We choose the place because we got to have some place, because you can't do it everywhere, so we have to make you a place. A logic, a reason for that choosing. Mashenken Yerushalayim, as opposed to Yerushalayim, is those that ort was der Eibusher hat Becher gewen. That is the place that Hashem chose, not mitzad hatam, not because of a reason, nor as those soll sein mokem asher Shchanos Yisborach. Didn't have to find a place. He didn't do it to give you a place. Hashem chose that because that's what he wants to be, the place where he wants to rest his blesses the divinity, the Shechina, B'meila. Since the Eibusher chose that place, is das euch der Mokoim, wo es darf sein akroves hakarbonos. That's why it's also the place where the offerings of the karbonos should be. Shomotavi, you bring it over there. To use a different language, different style, signal achar. The Bechira in Shiloh is given to Levin. The choosing of Shiloh was for the Yidden to give them a place. As they zon hoben, amokim yuchad lakrova, they should have a place specifically designated for offering. Not to be everywhere. Yes, is given freer as it was before heter abomis, when the bomis were permissible. Masha enkin the Bechira in Yerushalayim, as opposed to choosing Yerushalayim, is given mitzad dem Eibusher kavayochel. That is from Hashem. Hashem chooses. Ahu yizborech at kavayochel b'chver. He blessed, so to speak. He chose an ort l'shchinosei, a place for his divinity. Zois menuchos yad yad. This is my place that I want to rest here forever. As a result of that, that's where you're going to bring the kabbonis. And that makes the difference. Did Hashem in Shiloh, the main thing was to find a place. The main thing is that place, not so much the structure. But if it's a place where there's divinity, then the structure is included. It isn't this. Vav, mitzad dem unterschied in dem Ofen Abchira zwischen Shiloh and Yerushalayim. Because this distinction, the way Hashem chose Shiloh and Yerushalayim, is oich faran achiluk b'shayches dem minyan hanifchar. There's also a distinction as it is relates to this item that was chosen. As the Bechira b'Shiloh is kidei zol zayin an ort miyuchad lakrovo, since the choosing of Shiloh is in order that there should be a place specifically designated for bringing the karbonos to offering for the offerings, vert es bavorant. So this is already taken care of. As is genug when the Bechira is in the mokim. It's sufficient that Hashem chooses the place. There should be a designated place. The mokim habayis, the place of the house. Aber nicht in the bayis of the olov, but not in the house that was built in it. The Eibusher chose a place, not the house. Mashenkim Yerushalayim, as opposed to Yerushalayim, is the sabechira misadatzme. Over there was a choice on its own, not for a reason. There's no limiting reasoning. We're not doing it for something. In the minyan, in this thing, to choose it. Is das koilo saim the mokem abayis saim the bayis. That includes both the space in which the bayis is built and the house itself. The contrary. The house has to be included. Since it's an item that Hashem, the Shechinot Becher given, the Menuchos Adead, to have his resting place for eternity, is move on. It's understood as the menucha bepoil verduch the bais. How could the resting place be literally, in actuality, you need a house? Der bais gufa is a beis habchira. The house is a chosen house. But the Shiloh is not the bais habchira. The mokum yivchar is the place, but not the house. But this is oich mudgesh in the shinuye halishonis in the psukim now. That's also emphasized in the change of language in the above psukim, the psukim that talk about Shiloh. Over there, the emphasis is the space, and in the pasuk that talks about Yerushalayim, the emphasis is on the structure. But again, as to Shiloh, is on that pasuk. With regards to Shiloh, the verse says, "Hamokoy mashe yivchar Hashem alakach gomer losum as shmoy shom," to place his name there. There, that's the space, but not talking about the structure of B'shayches Yerushalayim. Is the Loshen HaKosov, but as it relates to Yerushalayim, the language of the verse Asher Yivchar Hashem Elokecha Boy, Hashem chosen him. That's the structure, the Beis Hamikdash, the Beis the Shaken Shmei Shom, to rest his name there. By Shiloh is the Bechira Nid Boy. By Shiloh, the choosing is not in it, in the Mokim. Over there, it's not. I said the bias over here, but the Rebbe is saying is over there, it's not the space, but it's basically losum es shmoy, to place his name. In other words, it's not a choosing for looking for a space, but it's where Hashem puts his name. Mashenkin by the Shalayim is the Yivchar boy in the Mokum, in the space itself. Again, I erroneously thought that the boy is referring to the actual bias that the Rebbe discussed before, but the Rebbe is actually, the boy is the space, the Bechira in the place itself. But by Shiloh, it's not the space so much, but it's the place's name. Zion. Is verstandig was the Rambam ruled the halachas hilchos beis habchira. Now we understand why the Rambam calls these halachas the laws of the chosen home. Choch as in the haschole, which is the koseres from hilchos beis habchira. Although in the beginning, which is the heading, the subject of the laws of beis habchira, was very noise gerechnet the mitzvahs welche seien in the halachas, in which the Rambam enumerates the mitzvahs which are in these laws. So the Rambam as the erste mitzvah over there, he clearly says the first mitzvah is livnei beis hamikdash. He uses the word mikdash. Over here he calls it beis habchira. And he said, but he over there he brings down in the heading. He clearly quotes the pasuk of beis hamikdash, unit beis habchira. Weil derich ze in the halachas gufe gleich in der erste halacha. Same thing within the halachas. The Rambam quotes psukim, bringt the pasuk vasuli mikdash. Bring the pasuk und nicht am pasuk wo steht the loshen bechira, not the verse where it says bechira. So why would he call the beis habechira when he's in the heading and in the halachas calls it old mikdash? Noch mehr, the weiterdige halachas b'shayches the beis hamikdash. Furthermore, the other halachas, as they relate to Beis Hamikdash, Rufter take on mit nomen Mikdash. He take calls it Mikdash. He doesn't say Klei HaBechira Beis HaBechira. It's a Klei HaMikdash, Beis Mikdash. So he actually calls it all by the name of Mikdash. And here the Rambam specifically calls it the Lashon of Beis HaBechira. The mit is Mudgesh at the Iker Chidush, when he wants to Beis HaBechira, is the Beis HaMikdash B'Yerushalayim. Because here the emphasis, the main novelty of the Beis Hamikdash Yerushalayim is that it's Beis Salomim, which is the eternal house, is Bechiras HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that it's Hashem choosing. That's the unique, that's the specialty. Mikdash was elsewhere also, but in this Beis Hamikdash is the Beis HaBechira. Was das drückt sich aus in dem, was euch der Beis is a Beis HaBechira. Over here, it's not just chosen, but it's a Beis HaBechira. While Shila was Bechira too, but not a Beis Bechira. Ches. And the Rebbe explains now another diuk in the Rambam that becomes clear based on the Rebbe's explanation. Apikol now, we can also explain the language of the Rambam. Kivon shenivne hamigdash b'Yerushalayim. He uses the building of the Migdash in Yerushalayim. It doesn't say once it was chosen, but it says the Migdash was built in Yerushalayim. Nesru kol hamakoymes kulon. All places have been prohibited, livnos be'em bayis laHashem, to build another house for Hashem. Why does the Rambam use after it was built the Migdash l'chayre v'bal das der iker oiftu in the Beis Elomi is the inyan habechira, since the main novelty in the eternal house is the idea that it was chosen. Or the Rambam gedaft zogen kiven shenifchar Beis Elomim, that the Beis Elomim was chosen. Noch mehr, in Mechilta steht in Mechilta says, as der Loshen, Achelei nifcher Yerushalayim, Achelei nifcher Beis Elomim. Before Yerushalayim was chosen, and before Beis Elomim was chosen, so he uses Loshen chosen over there. And the Rambam is Meshana for Loshen HaMechilta and Zogt, and the Rambam changes the language of the Mechilta, and he says, Kima Shenivna HaMikdash. Why would he say Nivna HaMikdash when it's all about the Bechira? Vapia now, based on the above Yashleimar, as Zanedot Tzvei Protim, in the Bechira B'Mikdash in Yerushalayim, there's two details. When Hashem chose the Migdash in Yerushalayim, Yeder and Zainsman, in different times. There was a time when Yerushalayim, the Beis HaMikdash was chosen this space, and there was a time when it was built. The Bechira b'Mokim HaMikdash, the space of Mikdash Bahara Meria, that's a Mount Meria. But this is given me Me'ovis. That was still from the times of the forefathers. Yitzchak and Avram, was the Farid was given the Mokim, as the Rambam quotes. The Farid, but the Rebbe quotes the Rambam, was the Farid was given the Mokim Sheboneh Avram HaMizbeach. Avram built the Mizbeach on the Har Meria, the Okad, all of Yitzchak, and he tied Yitzchak on it. Mokim Sheboneh B'Noach, and that's the place where Noach built. The Rambam is divided in Perek Beis, as the Rambam explains in the second chapter. So there was already a choosing of that space. That's one thing. Then on the Bechira, in the Bayis Gufa, but then the choice in the house itself, not just the space. But also that was accomplished when Nivna HaMikdash b'Yerushalayim, when the Mikdash was built in Yerushalayim. Und damals ist auch mit Teisig geworden die Shleimus HaBechira, and then it was also added the wholesomeness in the choosing from the Mokim, also the space. Once it was built, then the place was also elevated to the higher level of choice. Was the far is Dafke dan Nesru kol hamakoymes kulam limnes be'em bayis Hashem. Dafke then, only then, were all other places prohibited to build another Beis HaMikdash for Hashem. With this we also understand Farvos. The Rambam bringt auf dem Rayis from the Psukim, why he brings proof from the verses. Vayomer David zehu beis Hashem ha'elikim. That David said, this is the bayis which I'm looking, the Zem Mizbeach Yisrael, and this is the place where there's going to be a Mizbeach for Noel for Yidden, the place of the Beis HaMikdash. That's what the Rambam brings from the Psukim. Specifically, the emphasis on the bayis. But those bring Taroish V, the Bechida is, that brings out that the choice is not in Mokim HaMikdash, not just in the space of the Mikdash, not in the bayis Gufa, but actually in the structure itself. Then he says, Va'omer, in the second pasuk he brings down, and another person says, Zois menuchosi adeh, this is my resting forever. Was in the zweiten pasuk is Musbar der Tam. In the second verse, he explains the reason If them was the Bechira is Euchen Bayis, why the choosing is also in the structure, in the base of Bechira. Hayoisas der Eibishter at Bechig when them ort, since Hashem chose the place, Nitzuli Batam, the Tafkid Miyuchad Mokim Lakrova, not because of reason and a special purpose, a place to bring korbanos, nor al zois menuchosi adea. This is my resting place. They are is b'meila de bechira in the bayis gufa. So that means that the choice is the house itself. That is part of the bechira. Tes apizei moving the chile canal sivdaled. Also understand the difference we said before. Siv was benegayet zu shiloi state v'havesem shoma. Bring the Torah hyped on mitchiv havo shel ha'odom. The Torah starts with the obligation the person needs to bring. Und das bringt as a sido shoma. That brings there somewhere. It's finding a place for the person to bring, and Hashem gives him a place. That's what shoma. Und by Yerushalayim is das challah. By Islam the opposite. The opening is Shoma Taviyu. There's a place to bring. That's what you have to bring to the Viyah. The Rebbe explains this now. The obligation to bring Korbanos Tafkin Shile Bisman Mishkan Shile when there was the Mishkan Shile is Chiyuv Gabra. That was a obligation on the person. Since the Yidden are commanded to bring Korbanos. And then there's an additional place, obligation. There needs to be in a special place. Hashem chose for them the Mishkan Shila to be the place. Als the Mokim HaKrova, the place where to bring the offering. And specifically, that they chose a place for them to bring it. As vertchal oivzei on the people, on the gavra, becomes a rest, a prohibition to makros amechutz l'shiloi, to bring outside of shiloi. This is all an obligation on the people. The people need to bring it in one place, and if they don't bring it, there's all about the gavra. Masheikim b'Yerushalayim, as opposed to Yerushalayim, was there in abechir is mitzad atzmai over there. Shem chooses it on its own, not to give them a place, but the Eibishter wants to be in Yerushalayim in the Beis HaBechira, and in a chefza in a bais, and in an object in the house. The Beis HaBechira is yesh loimar. We can say at the mitzvah hakrova dorten to bring there is not the person is obligated. That becomes part of the korban. Lahakriv kol hakabonos Beis HaBechira. Over there, it's a mitzvah. All the korbanos need to be in the base of chira. Is euch mitzvah der chefza from the korban. It's also the object of the korban. A korban needs to be. It's not the person needs to bring him there, but a korban needs to be in the base of mikdash. Based on this will sweeten the language that the Rambam uses in the Sefer Hayah by the mitzvahs ha'akrova b'beis ha'chira, when he talks about the mitzvah of the offering in the base of Chida. Where hyped on the halachas nit midam chiyuv ha'odam. Over there, he doesn't start the laws by telling you the obligation of the person. Mitzvah sasei lahakriv kol ha'karbonis the base of Chida. There is a positive mitzvah to bring the karbonis to the base of Chida. It doesn't start that way. It doesn't start with the person. Nor with the karbonis, you start with the karbonis. Kol ha'karbonis kulam mitzvahs esel hakrim base of Chida. All korbanos is a positive mitzvah to bring the Beis HaBechira. It's an aspect in the korban. Was their fun is mashma. From this it appears at the chiv to makriv zayin the korban is davke dort. The obligation to offer the korban specifically there is nit nor atnai in ofen hakrova mitzad makriv. This is not just a condition in the way the offering should be done, because the one who offers is the gavra, the person. But also the korbanos, the object. Korbanos need to be in the Beis Hamikdash, and that was accomplished with the Beis Elam in Yerushalayim. We can say that's for this above reason. Since there is a chosen home, a mokem hashchina, a place for the shchina, bringt es euch a chiyuv of the chefze from the karbonis. This brings also an obligation on the object of the karbonis, as medarvze makriv zayin in the bayis, that you need to offer them in that home. That is Mesichas Shabbos Parshas Mato Masis, Shabbos Parshas Re'ei Tovshin Mem, and Shabbos Parshas Dvorim Tovshin Mem Beis.